Ever made a change online and wondered, like, did that actually work? Look, updated your profile picture, but did it actually change in the database? Well, today we are diving deep into a coding tool in PHP's PDO, and this gives you that confirmation.
Yeah.
It's called the rowCount function.
It's like getting a receipt for your database actions.
Exactly.
So think of it this way. Every button click, every form submission, every interaction with a website or an app usually triggers some action in a database.
Right.
And knowing how many rows were affected is crucial for things like debugging your code or even displaying real-time updates to users.
Okay. So imagine you are building an app and you've just run a chunk of code to update a bunch of entries.
Yeah.
Like, say, giving everyone who subscribed to your newsletter a cool new badge. Now, you don't want to just assume it worked, right?
Right. You need to know for sure.
Yeah.
And that's where this rowCount function comes in. It tells you exactly how many rows were impacted by your last SQL statement, whether it was an insert, update, or delete.
So our friends at plus2net.com gave a great breakdown of this, and one thing they emphasize is this. rowCount is all about actions, not just looking at data. It's like the difference between checking your bank balance and actually making a deposit.
Yeah.
One just shows you numbers, the other does something.
And this distinction is crucial, especially when it comes to select queries.
Ah, yes, the select query curveball.
Yeah.
And our trusty plus2net.com article specifically warns about this.
Right.
It's like they're waving a big red flag saying don't use rowCount after a select if you want an accurate count.
Because with select, you're fetching data, not changing it. It's like browsing items in an online store. You're not actually affecting the inventory until you hit add to cart.
Okay, that makes total sense. So if we are not using rowCount for those select queries, what's the alternative?
When you need a precise count of the data you're retrieving, select count is the way to go. It's like asking the store clerk, how many of these awesome gadgets do you actually have in stock?
Okay, that makes sense. But there are times when even our trusty rowCount might not give us a count, right? What about when we use truncate on a table? You know, that command that essentially hits the big delete all button?
You're exactly right. rowCount is designed to track the effects of specific database actions that modify individual rows.
Okay.
When you truncate a table, you're wiping the slate clean, not making changes row by row.
It'd be like trying to count the missing cookies after someone already devoured them. All the evidence is gone.
A very apt analogy. But speaking of actions and their consequences, let's dive into a practical example from the article that really brings home the importance of rowCount, particularly when dealing with those critical database updates. The plus2net.com article uses an example of updating student marks in a database. So say a teacher wants to give everyone a 5-point bonus on their last quiz. Sounds simple enough, right? But what if their code has a typo, and instead of adding 5 points, it accidentally sets everyone's score to a 5? Yikes.
Yeah, that's a teacher's worst nightmare.
Yeah.
That's where the rowCount comes in, right?
Yeah.
Like a safety net.
Exactly. This example shows how rowCount can be used within a database transaction. Now, a transaction lets you group several database operations together so they either all succeed, or if there's a problem, the whole thing gets rolled back.
Ah, so it's like hitting undo on a massive spreadsheet error, preventing a total catastrophe.
Precisely. So in this student grades scenario, the code first tries to execute the update,
Okay.
adding 5 points to each student's mark. But here's the crucial part. Right after that update runs, rowCount steps in to check how many rows were actually changed.
So if the code worked correctly, rowCount would return that it's successfully updated, like a whole class of 30 students or whatever.
Right. But let's say that typo happened, and instead of updating 30 rows, it accidentally set everyone's score to a 5. rowCount would likely return a much higher number, maybe even the total number of students in the entire database.
Right.
That right there would raise a red flag.
Yeah. And that's when the rollback kicks in, like a superhero swooping in to reverse the damage.
Exactly. The code essentially says, hold on, this doesn't look right. The number of rows affected doesn't match what we expected, so let's revert everything back to the way it was before we made this update.
Oh, that's great. So rowCount isn't just about confirming things went smoothly. It's also about catching those potential disasters before they happen.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, remember that social media app we talked about?
Yeah.
Think about all the database updates happening behind the scenes there. New posts like friend requests. Each one of those actions triggers a database update, right?
Yeah.
You're constantly changing numbers. How many messages are unread, how many followers you have.
And users expect those numbers to be accurate, right?
Right.
Imagine getting a notification that says, you have 2,387 new friend requests. Something's clearly off.
Yeah, it just totally undermines your trust in the app.
Exactly.
It's like that old saying, you can't judge a book by its cover, but in the digital world, those numbers are the cover.
Right.
They need to reflect what's actually going on.
Exactly. And that's what I find so fascinating. These seemingly small coding details, like understanding row counts, can have a huge impact on the user's overall experience.
Yeah, it's all connected. So to wrap things up,
Yeah.
we've been in the weeds of PHP's PDO today.
Yeah.
But this idea of checking your work,
Right.
of knowing how your database is being affected, that's universal.
Absolutely. Whether you're coding in Python, Java, or even using a no-code platform, the fundamental concept remains the same.
It's less about memorizing a specific function like rowCount, and more about adopting that detective mindset, always verifying, always asking, did this actually do what I thought it did?
It's about being a critical thinker, questioning assumptions, and ensuring that your digital creations are built on a foundation of solid, reliable code.
Well said. Big thanks to plus2net.com for the awesome article. And to you for joining us on this deep dive. Now go out there and write some code that would make even rowCount proud.
Happy coding.